Thanks for joining us today for BRMC's Healthy Connections. Deborah Baker's an audiologist and with Ear, Nose, and Throat Associates.
Right.
And what does well, I know what you do, kind of, but maybe not. So what is an audiologist?
An audiologist is a professional who has studied to evaluate hearing and look at the treatment of hearing loss and also ways to prevent hearing loss.
Okay.
Initially, we had to have a master's degree, but now a doctorate is required to become an audiologist.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I had no idea that there was that much involved. And
right.
It's great for people to understand how professional people really are, how much training you have to go through, how much schooling that you have to go through and all of that. Now, you said something that caught my ear, no pun intended here, about hearing loss prevention.
Yes.
Talk to me about that a little bit.
We know that noise, loud noise, can create hearing loss that's permanent. So that's why, like people who work at epoxy, for example, other industries in town, have to wear hearing protection, earplugs or earmuffs to protect their hearing from the loud noise.
Anybody that's working on airplanes, for instance,
Right.
they're out there with those
Right.
loud jet engines.
But also gunfire, like people who go out to the gun range and shoot targets, they need to be protecting their hearing. People who use chainsaws, even the lawnmower. Now the big thing is people listening to personal stereo systems, the MP3 players. Those can go up to as high as 100 decibels. Anything over 85 decibels can be harmful to hearing.
Oh my.
So I know a lot of parents are concerned about, well, is my child's hearing at stake because they're, using their music up too loud?
And the answer is
And
yes.
the answer is yes, if they're turning it up all the way.
Okay.
So the rule of thumb there is to turn it about halfway down.
Okay.
So if there's a volume control, turn it halfway.
Is that something that's going to show up right away, or as they age?
As they age, something that's extremely loud, like gunfire at close range, can create hearing loss right then. But the sad thing is that some of the effects of noise don't show up until several years later. And so there's this cumulative effect.
Okay.
So then you can add in other factors that may cause hearing loss also, and then it just kind of adds up.
Okay. Why is that? What happens as we age,
Well,
ear-wise?
the hearing system itself just ages like the rest of us do, and a lot of times what happens is that the hearing nerve, the effects of it works on the high frequencies or high-pitched sounds first, and that's typically what we see in a person who is older who has what's called presbyacusis, which means an aging ear. Everybody is different, though. There's some hereditary factors that can come into play, how much noise they've had in their background, all of that kind of combined. So sometimes we don't even know exactly what was the determining factor.
Right. It's just there. And now when someone would come in to you, what would be some of the first tests that you would perform to find out where they're at as far as their hearing goes?
Well, typically, like in our clinic where we are, we have both of our doctors there. They would send a patient over, so they probably would have already taken a look at the person's ears to make sure they didn't have a medical condition going on. But physicians also outside our office refer to us just for hearing evaluation. So what we do is we examine the ear to make sure there's not a blockage of earwax, which is a very common thing. If there's not, then we usually start off with something called tympanometry, which measures the eardrum movement. And that can pick up things like a hole in the eardrum or if there's fluid behind the eardrum. And that gives us a good start.
Okay.
At that point, we put them in the sound booth that we have 2 different testing rooms. And depending on the age of the person, if it's a child versus an adult versus an infant, there's different techniques that we use for testing people.
How would you test an infant?
That's a great question. Back in the mid-90s, we got started at Baxter Regional, the newborn hearing screening that's done in the nursery that the nurses now do. But there's equipment called otoacoustic emissions that is a great way to test or screen hearing to see if the function is there. And so with a little baby, you just put these little earphones in, and the equipment makes a sound that goes into the inner ear part. The inner ear part makes a sound that comes back and that's called an emission.
Okay.
And then the equipment picks that up and sees whether there's a response there or not.
All right, and if there's no response, then a child is...
Right, then we would do additional testing to find out what's going on there. So the younger kids, like 2, 3-year-olds, we use play activities with them, to where something where we would present a sound through a speaker, and they turn to it, and there's a mechanical toy that lights up as reinforcement.
All right.
So we do things like that, or whenever they hear a sound, to drop a block when they hear a sound, something that's more fun for them. And when they get up a little bit older, like 4 or 5, they're able to tell us when they hear a sound, much like an adult would.
Yeah, I know. Now, sometimes I have to be honest with you. I'm gonna. When I've had this done, and we were talking during the break that I've lost a little bit of the upper and a little bit of the lower. Not sure where I'm at right now, but I have a feeling probably not too far down the line, I may need some sort of equipment to hear a little bit better. What I'm finding now are words are dropped. It's almost as though at the end of a sentence I'm looking at the person going, what was that last word?
Yes.
It's almost like life is a mystery. I don't know what that entire sentence was. But one of the things that I've noticed is, as I'm watching the audiologist perform the exam, I'm sometimes tempted to go, okay, I think he or she is pushing that button right there, so maybe I heard that. I mean, there's this tendency to be a little bit competitive and going, there's nothing wrong with my ears, I'm fine. So how do you counter for something like that? You must have something built in to make sure that the responses are true.
We do. I mean, when I evaluate someone, I have them turned so that they cannot see when I'm pushing the button, try to keep my movements to a minimum. But we also do the check of the hearing more than once. So like when I present a tone for someone to hear, you go back and come back up to it and check it again.
Okay, so there's a fail-safe in the testing procedure to make sure that, well, they may not have...
And sometimes we also get people in who are trying to indicate they have hearing loss when they don't. Sometimes it's children looking for extra attention. Sometimes it's somebody who is wanting to say something caused a hearing loss so they can get compensation for it. So there are different techniques that we have to screen to see if on this test it makes sense compared to this. And typically people aren't smart enough to know what we're looking for. And not smart enough, that's not a good term to use.
That's fine, that works.
Yeah.
You're the professional in this case, and no, they're not smart enough to know what you're trying to determine from the test. What about, I don't know if you can answer this or not, but I'll throw it out there, and that is with sinus conditions. Does that play a role in not being able to hear as accurately as you need to if your sinuses are plugged?
Sometimes it can. With sinus problems, and that's a little bit out of my area, but there can be a lot of drainage at the back of the throat. At the back of the throat is an opening called the eustachian tube, which is that passageway to the ear that equalizes air pressure. Like when you go up a mountain and your ears pop, that's that eustachian tube allowing the ear to equalize pressure. When you have sinus drainage, sometimes that can irritate the opening of the eustachian tube and make it not work. So then the ears can get plugged up and then can become a problem. Typically not real severe, but it can have an influence. Like people have allergies, sometimes they'll have stuffiness of their ears.
Okay, that's what I've wondered about. And I know with eustachian tubes, is that more common in infants and children than it is in adults, or is it sort of equal between the two?
Typically it's younger children. It's because the angle of the eustachian tube is more horizontal. As we age, that eustachian tube starts tilting a little bit. So that's typically why we don't want parents feeding their babies with a bottle lying down, because it's easier for that fluid to get up through there into the ear. So to sit them up when they're feeding. But typically when children have recurrent bouts of otitis media, it's called, that usually tapers off around 6 to 7 years old, because that's when the eustachian tube reaches its mature level.
Okay. All right. My goodness, I'm learning a lot. I'm sitting here thinking, what have I done to my children? They were
We don't want to know. We don't
Things
wanna know.
keep changing.
They do. They sure do.
But it's a great reason to, it makes sense when you think about it. So we need to take just a short break right now. Don't go away. We'll be right back. We've got lots more questions for you. And let's find out how we can all hear better. We'll be right back.